EBB ABS Training Webinars. This webinar is part of a series providing an introduction to EU access and benefit sharing regulations and was developed by the Interreg-funded European Blue Biobank project. The European Blue Biobank project, or EBB, is a European Marine Biological Resource Centre project to promote compliance with access and benefit sharing frameworks for genetic resources derived from the Nagoya Protocol. It aims to facilitate sustainable access to marine biodiversity, its associated data, and extractable products for local and international academia and industry users. It also aims to incentivize biodiversity conservation in coastal ecosystems and provides tools to achieve these aims. These are the EBB Trace Database, a searchable catalogue of marine biological resources provided by the EBB Biobank, the EBB Track Tool for provision of macroorganisms, service supply, and biobank management, and the EBB EMBRC Best Practice Guide, a handbook for ABS compliance, which provides recommendations to marine biological resource collections and users' institutions, and the practical guide for users, Seek, Keep and Transfer, a step-by-step guide to ABS compliance when utilising marine genetic resources. This webinar is part of a series designed to provide an introduction to EU access and benefit sharing regulations for collections and users. Webinar 1 provides an introduction to ABS. Webinar 2 provides an overview of the scope of the EU ABS regulation on ABS compliance. Webinar 3 provides recommendations for institutions with users and collections of marine genetic resources. Webinar 4 considers managing ABS compliance in collections. Webinar 5, it provides an overview of compliance for users and a review of Seek, Keep and Transfer, a step-by-step guide to ABS compliance when utilising marine genetic resources. Webinar 6 discusses the EU registers, that is the registered collections and best practices as tools to support ABS compliance. We particularly draw your attention to the two handbooks provided by the project, the EBB EMBRC Best Practice Guide to ABS Compliance. This handbook is aimed at users, institutions and collection managers of marine biological resources. It provides an introduction, background and overview of ABS, user-friendly guidance to implementing ABS best practices for institutions. It covers a wide range of possible scenarios and includes technical guidelines and supporting material. Seek, Keep, Transfer is a practical guide for users of genetic resources. Users are guided through a 6-step process to perform ABS due diligence. And Webinar 5 provides a full overview of the guide. The following webinar and subsequent webinars in this series have been developed as introductory guides based on the EBB handbook and step-by-step guide. While the authors have aimed to make the information as accurate and up-to-date as possible, ABS is complex and evolving. The authors are not responsible for the results of any actions taken by institutions or users on the basis of information that is not within this webinar nor the EBB guides. The recommendations in this webinar do not supersede official texts or substitute for ABS policies that institutions may already have in place. Further specific information and support is available, and it is recommended that dedicated ABS support is sought from either the home organisation or from the ABS competent national authority for research in their country. Webinar 3 discusses how ABS needs to be considered in institutions' policies and discusses why an ABS code of conduct should be adopted. It provides a summary and overviews of the EBB EMBRC Best Practice Guide and a summary of ABS compliance for institutions. The final part of the presentation provides an overview of the technical guidelines and templates from the Best Practice Guide. Access and benefit sharing needs to be considered in an institution's policies. Access and benefit sharing compliance needs to be considered throughout the activities and workflows of an institution and implemented through policies and procedures and supported by staff and data management. The diagram on the right is taken from the EBB EMBRC Best Practice Guide to ABS Compliance and outlines how ABS considerations apply from the entry of a genetic resource to an institution, its utilisation, and then deposit in a collection or disposal. ABS should be considered, and institution policies should cover research activities, including publications, as these may request information to show that genetic resources have been obtained and used in compliance with ABS regulations. Collections and biological resource centres should understand and have policies in place to manage all their activities, which could include sampling protocols. Data management should be in place to support the institution in tracking the genetic resource and ensuring that the relevant information to support due diligence is available, and that any conditions around the use, supply, and benefit sharing are observed and can be demonstrated for compliance checks. Adopting the best practice recommendations for ABS compliance will support institutions to ensure that the genetic resources they are responsible for are compliant with applicable ABS legislation and due diligence reporting. The recommendations are intended to reduce the risk of unlawful utilisation of genetic resources and minimise the risk of legal consequences for researchers and their organisation. Best practices are intended to reduce the administrative burden and create a safety net process for researchers for obtaining funding and for publications. The measures increase transparency on how genetic resources and the associated traditional knowledge are utilised by the institution and its staff, and facilitate fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilisation of genetic resources. For non-commercial research, non-monetary benefit sharing is typically more appropriate than providing monetary benefits, and the ABS Best Practice Guide promotes these. Overall, adopting best practice will increase legal certainty around the institution's activities that involve genetic resources, and its best practice will attract users of bioresources to the EMBRC biobanks. As described in the introductory slides, the EBB EMBRC have developed a best practice guide to ABS compliance. Part 1 provides a background to the legal framework, scope, key principles, compliance with user obligations, and development of institution policy and processes. Part 2 supports implementation with more detailed guidance and technical guidelines, references, and further resources and policy checklists. Posters and sampling guidance are of direct practical use for training and developing protocols. And annexes include model documents and templates, including material accession forms, material transfer agreements, and terms and conditions. The Best Practice Guide provides a number of recommendations for institutions. It is important that institutions identify which activities will require managing and define the institution's responsibility for ABS. Internal policies should identify the persons with the legal authority for agreeing to terms and signing ABS commitments, and those that are responsible for providing training to staff and keeping records of training being delivered and updating relevant materials. It should be clear which individuals have responsibility for ABS, including due diligence. And the institution should identify who the policies are relevant to, for example, employees, research associates, subcontractors, external visitors, or users of the institution's services. And the institution should be aware of the compliance checking requirements and the scheduling of these by the competent national authority. Internal auditing of collections, policies, and procedures should be undertaken to ensure compliance across activities, including acquisition, depositing, utilisation, supply and disposal, and processes for dealing with deliberate or accidental breaches of ABS regulations. So in summary, the Best Practice Guide provides 8 technical guidelines. They cover the acquisition of genetic resources through sampling and ex situ provision, including through visiting researchers. And they also cover the depositing and utilisation of genetic resources and supply and transfer to third parties. They also cover data management linked to ABS monitoring to ensure that the right information is collected and stored to report ABS compliance. The guidelines also cover the disposal, removal, and loss of genetic resources. They also provide information to ensure that retrospective compliance of genetic resources already in the institution. Finally, the guidelines also provide information about registering a collection with the EU Register of Collections. Most of the guidelines provide recommendations for institutions to follow to ensure ABS compliance. Annex 3 compiles all recommendations with a policy checklist to ensure that they are easily accessible. And the best practice guide also provides useful templates in 5 annexes. Annex 1 provides a sample of terms and conditions for academic use and a model material transfer agreement. Both of these are required for the supply of genetic resources to third parties. A material accession form is used when accepting genetic resources into an institutional collection, and a model for this is also provided. When negotiating mutually agreed terms, the benefits to be shared can be monetary or non-monetary. Typically for non-commercial research, non-monetary benefits are more appropriate. And this annex provides a range of examples which institutions should be aware of, and these include offering collaboration and sharing of research. Annexes 4 and 6 outline the requirements for data management in an institution and provide a project example. Annex 4 outlines the information required for internal ABS management to comply with EU ABS regulations and third-party supply of genetic resources, while Annex 6 provides information, recommendations and examples from a project that can be adopted. And finally, Annex 5 provides a poster, Don't Be a Biopirate, that can be used to raise awareness of ABS issues for researchers and users within an institution. So we hope that you have enjoyed this webinar. The next webinar in this series is the 4th and will provide further information on managing ABS compliance for collections of genetic resources. I'd like to thank you for watching this webinar and would like to remind you that this webinar is a general introduction to ABS and that the disclaimer provides important information that we would like to draw your attention to. To ensure compliance with ABS, you should refer to official texts and seek advice from your organisation or the ABS competent national authority in the state in which you work.